Hello, and welcome to this episode of the ASHA podcast. I'm Fred Wyand with the American Sexual Health Association, ASHA. We're focusing today on young men, their overall well being, but especially their mental health and the challenges that boys and young men seem to be grappling with as they navigate contemporary society. Our guest is Dennis Barbour, the president and CEO of the Partnership for Male Youth. That's the only national organization that has a singular focus on the health and well-being of males ages 10 to 25. So he's clearly the source. Mr. Barbour, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today.
Sure, thank you.
So, get right into it. Your website talks about how, after age 15, use of primary healthcare services declines among adolescent males, while among females of the same age, it increases primarily as they transition to OB/GYN care. So, as males leave the pediatrician's office and then they're left often outside the healthcare system, there's still an increased risk of a number of physical and mental health issues, including suicide, risky behaviors, and some sexually transmitted infections. And again, I'm pulling all that from your website. So, just if you would talk about the impact of young males being left out of the healthcare system and how do we get them back in?
Well, a lot of it has to do with some of the ramifications. One of the ramifications of it is that as a result of that, they receive little to no preventive services. And that is the cause of, I like to say that they stop seeing a clinician in their mid-teens and they don't show up again until they're in their 40s and they have a heart attack or something. And so it ends up being a lifetime of not really getting adequate medical care. There are a whole range of reasons for that, not the least of which is there are few providers that actually do engage with males, young males. And there again are reasons for that. Part of it is to do to the parents seeking out health care for their young males. There is a bit of a stigma issue with young males in terms of masculinity, norms of masculinity, and young males don't like to see themselves as vulnerable. So there are a range of issues related to what causes this to happen. Systemically, though, it basically has to do with our healthcare system, and clinicians are not trained to treat young males. And so that's a big part of it. We'd like to say that there's a continuum here that we're working on. First of all, is raising awareness among clinicians, parents and the general public, but also if just talking about clinicians for the moment, raising awareness with clinicians about the needs of young males and vis-a-vis their health care. The next step in that process, once you raise awareness, is providing resources for these clinicians. Then you have to have training for these clinicians. And then ultimately, all of that is for naught if, in fact, you don't engage young males. So a lot of the work that we do has to focus on engaging young males, finding where they are, because they're not in clinicians' offices. So ergo, we need to find out where they are, where points of access are for young males and work on them. For example, sports physicals. That's an excellent opportunity to get out a message about preventive health behaviors. Um, Sports physicals, college health services, fraternities, for example. That's another point of access to young males. But part of our focus has been on engagement of young males because they're not being engaged within the healthcare system, generally speaking.
I like the point you made that one of the barriers is that young men don't like to see themselves as vulnerable, and that can be a barrier. And I never thought about that, but that does make perfect sense. Somehow we need to maybe normalize among young men the idea of seeking healthcare. Maybe this is a normal thing that's good to do and that everybody should be doing. I'm glad you brought that up. Um, you mentioned a lot there about the value of preventive care. And we know that among STIs, sexually transmitted infections, a big part of preventive care is testing so that you can, because so many STIs don't have symptoms. Do you think we should recommend STI testing really more proactively for all sexually active young men, or how should we engage them around STIs and more broadly sexual health?
Absolutely. And there again, part of the problem is the healthcare system itself and the points of access and getting information to them about the need for testing for STIs. That's a big issue. I keep coming back to that, we have to figure out how to get to these guys, even if we're providing the services. But in fact, in terms of STIs, there is a need for greater screening because the fact of the matter is young males are not screened at the same rate that young females are. And a part of that, of course, goes back to the fact that females generally transition to gynecologic care. And then they got transfer from, in addition to gynecologic care, they they end up seeing primary care providers. It's a gatekeeper. Gynecologists are gatekeepers for primary care providers. And within those contexts, they're more apt to be screened.
Mm, yeah, that makes sense. Um, and I wonder too, if here again, if this doesn't get back to some of the masculinity issue, I mean, that can be sort of an intimidating thing to talk, I mean, it's one thing to go get your flu shot, but it's another thing to go and to have your private parts examined or even to talk about them, right?
Right.
Yeah. So, why do you think that young men, compared to past generations, they seem less likely to enroll in college and complete a degree? What's going on with the whole educational attainment issue?
Well, part of it has to do with the way that early education is set up. And in fact, it is true that girls progress at a more rapid rate than young men do. In fact, it's been proposed that young men be held back 2 years so that they can catch up to the girls, if you will. But the what this translates to is the fact that in young boys do not perform as well generally in school as young girls do. As a result of that, they do not go on to higher education at the same rates that girls do. And as a result of that, their employment prospects are much less than young girls or young women are. So all of this is, again, it's a continuum that starts at a very early age. But what happens is, and what has been happening even more and more with the economy the way it is, and the constricture in terms of higher education among young males, is that their employment opportunities are diminished. And as a result of that, that opens up a whole Pandora's box of issues having to do with healthcare, mental health, physical health, and so on.
This whole thing, it sounds like there's just a whole stew of just like society and emotions and trying to grapple with what it means to be masculine in the modern world. That's a lot to sort out. And going back to something you said earlier, we don't maybe have a lot of healthcare providers who are really focused on young men or men's issues. And so maybe our systems aren't really equipped to deal with them effectively. Is that fair to say?
That's very fair to say. It's like I said, the issues are systemic. And until you tackle those issues, you tackle them one by one. You can't be overwhelmed by the fact that it is systemic. One of the ways, for example, with education, it's been proposed that we hold back boys for 2 years. That's one way of getting them started early in terms of being able to maintain the same level of education as young
Yeah.
girls do.
Okay. All right. So in the show notes, we're going to put a link to your website, the Partnership for Male Youth. And not only does that have a lot of information, but I think you also link to some other resources and things. So that's a good place to start. My final question for you. How do you, are you at all optimistic? I mean, do you think that there's any political will to address these things? Just how do you feel going forward? Where are we?
Well, in recent years, I would say, particularly in the last 5 years, and part of this is because of the development of the manosphere, if you will, there's been increasing attention given to the plight, if you will, of young men. The fact that they're dropping out of the system, they're not engaging in education, they don't have the employment opportunities, and so on. And a lot of people have begun to look at some of the causes of that, some of which I've just articulated, and addressing those one by one.
Okay. So it sounds like at least there's some awareness here, and hopefully we can get some movement on these issues. It's a fascinating discussion. This is something we'll probably want to revisit as things change down the road. And so we may be seeking your insights again. But thank you so much. We've been talking with Dennis Barbour, President and CEO of the Partnership for Male Youth. Thank you again for really just sort of highlighting these issues. And we will, of course, link to your website in the show notes. Mr. Barbour, thank you again.
Thank you.
It's absolutely my pleasure. And thank you as well, intrepid listeners. We appreciate you for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe so you get all the latest episodes. And if you have any comments or suggestions for future episodes, email us info@ashesexualhealth.org. Bye for now.